Daredevil Born Again is back for a second season that promises to be absolutely explosive. 1 year after the official return of Matt Murdock and Wilson Fisk to the forefront of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, many fans are eagerly waiting for Marvel's next move. Indeed, one of the most popular characters in the Marvel Universe on television has experienced ups and downs during his integration into the cinematic universe. First appearing alongside Peter Parker as his lawyer, he was then sent off here and there in several series, not always in the best way, before finally making his grand return in his own series, a sort of soft reboot after Netflix that actually continued the Defenders arc. But it wasn't a flawless return, since season 1 had a very complicated production. While half of the series had been filmed, the writers and actors strike broke out. A pivotal moment for the Marvel Cinematic Universe since Kevin Feige, head of Marvel, and Bob Iger, chief executive officer of Disney, took the opportunity to make a 180-degree turn in an attempt to save the Marvel Cinematic Universe from an impending disaster. It's simple. A large part of the creative teams on the series was replaced by a new showrunner. This gave us a sick and inconsistent season 1. As a result, there was a misleading promotion that greatly frustrated the fans. Only the first and last episodes were directed by the new team. The rest reused the original direction. The series was inconsistent and honestly, sometimes disappointing. But Darius Cardapan, the new showrunner, promises us that this season 2 lives up to expectations and introduces a classic Daredevil that should delight fans. But before we dive into this season 2, which sees the return of Jessica Jones and surely Luke Cage and Danny Rand, we need more than ever to refresh our memories and go over all the New York street level lore. In this video, we'll cover the full history of the Defenders, with a brief summary of Born Again Season 1, but also my predictions for this Season 2 and how it could lead us to a totally crazy Season 3. That's why, together, we're entering the spoiler zone, the zone of all dangers. You're with Kevin Buckhardt, your favorite theorist, and your favorite red glasses wearing lawyer's favorite. Roll the intro. Daredevil, the man without fear. I imagine that if you're here, it's because you already know the hero, at least the one from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But you never know, just in case. No, here, we're not going to talk about the version played by Ben Affleck in 2003, but the one that started on Netflix in 2015. At the time, Marvel didn't have a streaming platform like Disney+, so all the Marvel television series were spread out across several platforms. Netflix then acquired the rights to the street-level heroes in 2013 to develop its own universe. And it was a real success, at least until it was cancelled. It was a surprise after season 3 of Daredevil, which was praised as the best of all the Marvel series. The cancellation was directly linked to Marvel's plan to develop its future platform, Disney+, but also to the huge costs associated with licensing for Netflix. As a result, these characters completely disappeared from circulation for legal reasons, since Marvel was not allowed to use them for 24 months after the cancellation. That's why we didn't see Matt Murdock again until his cameo in Spider-Man: No Way Home in 2021. But let's go back to the beginning with Daredevil. In 2015, in the dark neighborhood of Hell's Kitchen in New York, we find Matt Murdock. In a Catholic church, he confesses to Reverend Lantham and tells him that he's about to do something wrong.
I'm not seeking penance for what I've done, Father. What I've done, Father. I'm not asking for forgiveness. What I'm about to do.
Religion is truly one of the pillars of Daredevil's character. His relationship with God is part of the torment that haunts him as he struggles to contain his demons. Because once night falls, the aspiring lawyer becomes the man in black. He investigates a child trafficking ring in a forceful way. Despite being blind, Matt had an accident in his childhood that changed his life. While trying to save a passerby, he is blinded by a chemical that allows him to develop heightened senses. He compensates for his loss of sight with a radar-like sense of sound. He is raised by his single father, Jack Murdock, a boxer capable of taking every hit without ever being knocked out. A quality that will cost him his life since he is murdered for refusing to throw a rigged match. Matt ends up in an orphanage, inheriting his father's rage and self-sacrifice. He is then taken in by Stick, a ruthless martial arts master who is also blind, who trains him for a secret war before abandoning him abruptly. Matt grows up surrounded by incredible violence, torn between religion and an almost obsessive sense of justice. In the present, Matt opens his law firm with his friend Foggy, Nelson, and Murdock. Their very first case is already extremely delicate. They defend Karen Page, a secretary who has been framed and wrongly accused of murder. After discovering a vast embezzlement network within the company Union Allied, we learn that this company made its fortune by illegally winning New York construction contracts. After the attack by the Shitori, a front company that actually hides a sprawling mafia network. In Hell's Kitchen, At the top of this criminal empire is Wilson Fisk, also known as the Kingpin, a shadowy figure of organized crime in New York. We learn he has a fragile alliance with several criminal organizations. Vladimir Ransko's Russian Mafia, Nobu's Yakuza, Madame Gao's Chinese Triads, and the financier Lee Landersley. Fisk is the dark reflection of Matt, possessing the same inner rage. He also had a traumatic childhood, with a violent father whom he eventually killed with a hammer. A trauma that caused him severe psychological issues and extreme violence. But let's get back to Karen Page. In this murder case, everything seems to point to her. However, Matt, thanks to his abilities, understands that she is telling the truth, so he agrees to defend her, both as a lawyer and as a vigilante. Karen then joins the firm as a volunteer and continues her investigation into Union Allied, alongside investigative journalist Ben Urich, a man whom Fisk will eventually have killed. Ben Urich is actually the uncle of Bibi Urich, the journalist who runs the digital media outlet The Bibi Report in Season 1 of Born Again, but we'll talk more about that a little later. For his part, Matt continues his investigation into child trafficking and goes directly after the Russian Mafia, a crushing failure that leads him into the arms of Claire Temple. In both the comics and Marvel Cinematic Universe, she is the night nurse caring for New York's street-level heroes. But Matt doesn't give up and goes back into the fight, which leads us to one of the most memorable scenes in the Marvel series, the hallway scene where he beats up a gang of Russian mobsters. An action that allows him to save a child, but it won't be without consequences since the Russians kidnap Claire. To get to Matt, which is a pretty bad idea, again Matt is going to demolish them. This pushes the Russian Mafia, cornered, to ask Wilson Fisk for help. However, Fisk, on his side, has just met Vanessa. Earlier, in an art gallery, the brutal mafia boss is fascinated by an entirely white painting. A painting that reminds him of the wall his father made him face during his mother's beating. That's where he meets Vanessa, the owner of the gallery, a refined woman with whom he seemingly has nothing in common, but whom he falls madly in love with. And it's during their first date that the Russians come to interrupt him. Now, there's one thing you should never do to Ked: embarrass him.
You embarrassed me, in front of her.
So he takes it upon himself to punish one of the mafia bosses by making his head a lot lighter with a few slams of the car door. This event pushes the Russians and Daredevil to join forces against Fisk, but he quickly falls into the Kingpin's trap, who is always one step ahead. He organizes a series of bombings to eliminate his enemies and puts the blame on the vigilante Daredevil, who is now wanted by the police. This is the first real confrontation between the two nemesis.
You and I have a lot in common. We're nothing alike.
We then understand the extent of Fisk's power. A Russian witness ready to talk is executed right in the interrogation room by a corrupt cop acting on Fisk's orders. Matt then crosses paths again with Stick, his former master. He goes on the hunt for Black Sky, a human weapon revered by the secret organization. The Hand in the comics is an ancient sect of ninjas who worship a demon called the Beast, an entity capable of possessing avatars, including the Black Sky. The Hand also possesses the secret of resurrection, allowing them to bring these ninjas back to life, again and again, but here, the Black Sky is just a child. And despite Matt's attempts to stop him, Stick, being extremely pragmatic, assassinates him. This triggers the anger of Nobu, the leader of the Yakuza and a formidable assassin of the Hand. After an extremely violent fight, Matt manages to defeat Nobu while discovering that Fisk is wearing a bulletproof suit. Back at home, Matt collapses and Foggy discovers his double identity. Matt then has no choice but to fully embrace his role and move forward. Melvin Potter, the man who designed Fisk's armor, he then makes him a suit, the iconic symbol of Daredevil, the devil of Hell's Kitchen. Meanwhile, Fisk keeps moving his pieces forward and reveals his true nature to Vanessa, who fully chooses to accept him. After Ben Urich's article, Fisk presents himself in the media as a victim and exposes Daredevil as a criminal. But when a corrupt police officer finally agrees to testify against him, a massive wave of arrests shakes the New York police. Until it reaches Fisk himself, he manages to escape, but the new Daredevil catches up with him. The two men face off in a brutal fight, and Matt ends up handing him over to the police. The Kingpin is in prison, and Hell's Kitchen has found its protector. Well, it seemed important to me to really go into the details of this first season. It's foundational for the Marvel street-level universe, and sets the stage for everything we'll discuss next. But for the rest, I'll obviously have to make stricter choices so this video doesn't last 4 days. Punisher, the ideological clash. Season 2, Wilson Fisk is behind bars. And Hell's Kitchen is plunged into a tough war between the Irish Mafia, the Mexican cartels, and the Dogs of Hell bikers. A dynamic violently interrupted by the arrival of a new player, Frank Castle, also known as the Punisher, a former Special Forces commando. His family was gunned down during a shootout involving several gangs, and since then, he has sworn to wipe them out. Well, even though we'll later learn that it was a plot orchestrated by his former CIA instructor and his best friend, Billy Russo, whom he will take down in his own series.
Look for them. It's going to be the same for you.
When you look at your ugly, mangled face, you'll remember what you did. You'll remember now.
As the Nelson and Murdoch law firm becomes involved in this case, Daredevil confronts Punisher. Castle then shoots him point blank in the head, man. Saved by his helmet, Matt wakes up chained on a rooftop where the two vigilantes debate their views on justice. Castle claims his method is the only effective way to fight repeat offenders.
That this world, it needs men that are willing to make the hard call. That's what I think. I think you and me are the same, only I do the one thing that you can't. You hit them and they get up, I hit them and they stay down.
While Murdoch continues to believe in redemption and the justice system.
I don't kill anyone. Is that why you think you're better than me? No. Is that why you think you're a big hero? People don't have to die. You believe that. I believe it's not my call, and it isn't yours either.
Later, Frank is captured and tortured by the Irish Mafia. Daredevil intervenes and saves him, then manages to convince him to turn himself into the police. His case is then taken over by Nelson and Murdoch, who try to help him avoid the death penalty. But the hearing quickly turns into a fiasco, with Frank losing control and literally exploding in the middle of the courtroom.
Put down the people I killed. I want you to know that I'd do it all again. Any lowlife,
Any maggot piece of shit that I put down, I did it because I liked it. Hell, I loved it. You call me the Punisher, ain't that right? The big bad Punisher?
He is eventually incarcerated in the same prison as the Kingpin. Fisk quickly realizes that he can use him and manipulates him to eliminate one of his enemies inside the prison, before trying to have him assassinated himself. But we're talking about the Punisher here. Fisk then realizes that he can turn Frank into a real weapon. He sees in him the perfect opportunity to eliminate his competitors on the outside and arranges his escape. Meanwhile, Karen Page investigates the massacre of the Castle family. She discovers that it was actually a setup orchestrated by Ray Schoenhofer, also known as the Blacksmith, Frank Castle's former military commander. He eventually finds him, executes him, and recovers his entire military arsenal in the process. And it's during this investigation that Karen and Frank grow closer. Matt investigates Castle's escape and confronts his son in prison, threatening to target Vanessa.
Say his name, go on, do it.
From that moment on, it's no longer just the Kingpin against Daredevil, but truly Fisk against Murdoch, even though Fisk hasn't yet made the connection between the Vigilantes' two identities. At the same time, Matt's childhood love reappears. Elektra Natchios, true to herself, remains a very bad influence on him. She involves him in investigating the Roxxon Corporation, and together they uncover the Hand's return. Matt then learns about the ancient group's horrors and exploitation of people. Together, they face a horde of ninjas, among whom is Nobu, whom Matt had already defeated in Season 1, but Nobu has been resurrected, and he is more dangerous than ever. Stick then intervenes and reveals the truth. Elektra is actually the new Black Sky of the Hand. Pragmatic as always, Stick tries to assassinate her to prevent the sect from taking her back, but Matt steps in. They all end up in a final showdown against the Hand. Stick beheads Nobu, the Punisher covers the fight from another rooftop, and Elektra ends up sacrificing herself to save Matt, but her body disappears and is taken by the Hand. For his part, Matt finally confesses his true identity to Karen. And the law firm Nelson and Murdoch is dissolved, also known as Alias Investigations. Jessica Jones, the excellent actress Kristen Ritter, is back in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. In Season 2 of Born Again, she reprises her role as the super private detective Jessica Jones. Well, maybe you haven't seen this series, which is a shame since Season 1 is a delight. Even if you've seen it, you probably don't remember. Don't worry, Uncle Kevin is here. Jessica has superhuman strength and the ability to jump very long distances, which is often perceived as a form of limited flight. However, she gave up the life of a vigilante after being forced to commit a murder by Zebediah Kilgrave, also known as the Purple Man. He is the main villain of Season 1. Kilgrave is able, thanks to a virus he secretes, to bend people to his will and make them do absolutely anything he wants. And it was this terrible act that finally allowed Jessica to break free from his control. Consumed by remorse and sinking into alcoholism, she then opens her private detective agency, Alias Investigations, while avoiding any confrontation as much as possible. However, Kilgrave resurfaces when Jessica starts investigating the disappearance of a student, Hope Slotman, a student who, once found, coldly murders her parents in a police station under Kilgrave's orders. Convinced of the involvement of the Purple Man, Jessica then embarks on an obsessive hunt. We also get to know Trish Walker, Jessica's best friend. A former teenage star, she has become a radio host. Aware of the threat that Kilgrave poses, she doesn't hesitate to provoke him publicly on the radio. Until the day he sends a police officer, Will Simpson, to kill her. When he is stopped by Jessica, Simpson is now driven by a desire for revenge. And then he starts taking experimental pills, which greatly increase his strength at the cost of his mental health. During this series, Jessica also gets closer to Luke Cage, the indestructible man. The two develop a relationship until the moment Jessica tells him the truth. She is the one who, under Kilgrave's control, killed his wife. Obviously, that puts a damper on things. After many increasingly violent and disturbing confrontations with Kilgrave, he ends up taking control of Luke Cage. He uses him to destroy his own bar and try to eliminate Jessica. She has no choice but to shoot him at point-blank range with a shotgun to bring him back to his senses. But Luke Cage, who is supposed to be indestructible, suffers a serious head injury. Jessica then takes him to Claire Temple, who can't pierce his skin and to save him has to go through his eye. The hunt for Kilgrave finally ends when he takes Trish hostage. Believing he still controls Jessica, he tries to make her say she loves him. But Jessica is now immune to his power. She manages to get close to him and breaks his neck. The curse is lifted for everyone he controlled, and Jessica is finally free. Luke Cage, the Power Man. We discovered Luke Cage in the Jessica Jones series, so now it's time to enter his world, since there's a good chance he'll be back at the end of Season 2 of Born Again. And definitely a key player in Season 3, but just so you know, from here on out, we're getting straight to the point. Luke Cage, originally Carl Lucas, is a former police officer who was wrongfully convicted in Seagate Penitentiary. He suffered under the tyranny of Albert Rackham, a corrupt guard who organized illegal death matches between prisoners. But when he drew the guard's wrath, Luke was beaten and left for dead. Dr. Noah Bernstein, a researcher working on a new super soldier serum, tries to save him by immersing him in an experimental chemical bath. The experiment causes a genetic mutation that gives him superhuman strength and indestructible skin. Carl then manages to escape and disappears under a new identity, Luke Cage. Following the events of Jessica Jones, he settles in Harlem where he tries to keep a low profile. He juggles two small jobs that are about to collide. First at Pop's, a respected neighborhood barber, whose shop is considered a neutral zone, and also at the Baron's nightclub. Of local crime, the Harlem Paradise, run by Cottonmouth. But a deal gone wrong ends up affecting Pop, who dies during a shootout in his own shop. Luke Cage then decides to come out of the shadows and steal the money from those responsible, which quickly throws Harlem into chaos. Maria Dillard, Cottonmouth's cousin and an influential politician, then murders the crime boss and frames Luke Cage for it. He gets help from Misty Knight, an investigator who decides to believe him and cover for him. On the run, Luke finds himself facing a new enemy, Diamondback, an illegitimate brother who wants him dead. He uses a Judas bullet, made from an alien alloy, capable of piercing Luke's indestructible skin and poisoning him from the inside. Once again, he is saved by Claire Temple, the night nurse. This explosive season ends with a showdown between Luke Cage and Diamondback, who wears an exoskeleton armor made by Hammer Industries. Luke finally manages to win, but he is arrested by the authorities who have tracked him down. After his escape from prison, Harlem is now at the mercy of Maria, and Luke Cage goes back behind bars. Fist. Just like Luke Cage, Danny Rand is suspected to be returning for Born Again, even though nothing has been made official. He may not be the fans' favorite hero, or at least the actor who plays him isn't really. But he could very well have a major role in the future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, so let's take some time to remember his story. 15 years after his family vanished in a plane crash over the Himalayas, young billionaire Danny mysteriously returns to his namesake company's New York headquarters. As the only survivor, he was taken in by warrior monks from interdimensional Kowloon. They trained him in martial arts, and after facing the dragon Chow Lao, he became the new immortal. Iron Fist, the protector of the city against the Hand Organization, their sworn enemy, has powers that allow him to focus his chi, making his fist absolutely indestructible and devastating. Obviously, the new company leaders don't look favorably on his return. It's Danik. They even have him committed, but lawyer Jerry Hogarth eventually proves his identity. Danny also recovers the shares rightfully his. He thus regains his place on the board of directors and at the same time his few billions. But Danny quickly discovers that the Hand has infiltrated the company and is using it to flood the streets of New York with synthetic heroin. Danny then teams up with Colleen Wing, a martial arts expert directly affected by this drug invasion, as well as with Claire Temple. Yes, her again. To investigate the case, he discovers that the operation is led by Madame Gao, whom we already know from season 1 of Daredevil. She is one of the main leaders of the Hand. We also learn that Red Hook, the free zone created by the Kingpin in season 1 of Born Again, is where the Hand operates. But also that it is owned by Rand Enterprise, which could be important later on. Anyway, he then goes to China to stop the drug production and capture its leader, which causes strong tensions both within the Hand and Rand Enterprise. And from there, everything starts to go a bit all over the place. Colleen's sensei turns out to be a leader of the Hand, and the chief executive officer's father is actually resurrected by the Hand. And he's the one who ordered the murder of Danny's parents. Danny's best friend from Kunlun, Davos, comes back to accuse him of abandoning the city. And in the end, everyone ends up killing each other. In short, at the end of the season, there's a huge mess left, still infiltrated by Madame Gao. Danny and Colleen then return to Kunlun, where they discover that the city has simply disappeared, surrounded by the corpses of ninjas. The Hand, it's too late. He really has abandoned his own people. That's how this strange season ends. As you've understood, I'm not a big fan. Defenders, assemble. We're reaching the convergence point of all these stories, with the main theme being the fight against the Hand. New York is threatened by the Hand and its leaders, the Five Fingers. We find Alexandre Darid, Madame Gao, Bakuto, Murakami, and Sowande, whose immortality depends on a substance extracted from the bones of a dragon buried beneath the city. Yes, we've clearly gone very far since Daredevil Season 1. Anyway, they decide to use what's left of this substance to resurrect Elektra, who then becomes the Black Sky, and to start a massive drilling operation to reach the dragon's bones under Midland Circle, which causes seismic tremors that threaten the entire city. And each character will end up getting involved in this matter, which will eventually bring them together. Jessica is investigating the murder of the architect who worked on the Midland Circle project built above the dragon. LeCage, released from prison thanks to Foggy, is tracking down a Harlem gang hired to cover up activities related to the drilling. Danny Ren is back in New York following the trail of the Hand from Cambodia. And finally, Matt Murdock becomes Jessica's lawyer after she has just been arrested. They all end up facing Elektra, who no longer remembers her life before her resurrection. After another hallway fight against ninjas, they finally meet up in Chinatown, where Stick explains the situation to them. Together, they discover that the portal leading to the dragon beneath Midland Circle can only be activated by the powers of the Iron Fist. This immediately causes tension among the heroes. Danny ends up knocked out, and Stick, true to himself, decides it's better to kill him to prevent the Hand from using his power. However, Elektra gets ahead of him, executes Stick, and captures Danny. Elektra eventually regains her memory and decides to decapitate Alexandra, the leader of the Hand, to take control of the organization herself. The Defenders, accompanied by Colleen Wing, Misty Knight, and Claire Temple, then embark on a race against time to bring down the building above the dragon's remains and prevent the Hand from destroying the city. In short, it's a fight, and Daredevil tries everything to reason with Elektra, even deciding in a final kiss to stay with her as the building collapses on them. The Defenders have saved New York and defeated the Hand. The epilogue shows us that, although he is considered dead, Matt Murdock has survived. He is now recovering in a convent. Which finally brings us to Season 3 of Daredevil, the best Daredevil, Fisk, and Bullseye. The season begins with Matt's unexpected survival after the collapse of Midland Circle. Seriously injured, deaf in one ear, and completely disoriented, he is found by passers-by and then taken to the Catholic orphanage where he grew up. It's Sister Maggie who takes care of him. And later, he will discover that she is actually his biological mother, who abandoned him when he was just a baby.
Our son looks too much like you, Jack.
Jack Matt refuses to get treatment and completely rejects his faith, convinced that God has abandoned him. For him, his life is over, both as Matt Murdock and as Daredevil. Meanwhile, Wilson Fisk is cooperating with the FBI in exchange for Vanessa's protection. With this information, he enables the arrest of all his criminal associates. He fakes an assault to be officially released from prison and put under house arrest. In a penthouse under the status of a very important person informant for the FBI, a penthouse where he gradually resumes his criminal activities in secret from a hidden room. Matt's prison release drives him to don the suit again and finally confront the Kingpin. But during a visit to the prison to investigate, Fisk calls him directly to tell him that he won't be leaving here, alive.
And that's something I can't forgive.
Then follows an absolutely brilliant riot scene in the prison, from which Matt barely escapes. It's at that moment that Fisk realizes that Matt is not just a blind lawyer, but also his worst enemy, Daredevil. Matt, on his side, realizes that Fisk now controls several federal agents. One of them is the former sharpshooter Benjamin Poindexter, also known as Bullseye, a man capable of turning any object into a deadly projectile. The Kingpin then manipulates him, breaks him psychologically until he becomes a sort of mentor to him. He sends him to attack a newsroom where Karen Page works, wearing the Daredevil costume. Matt, arriving too late, fails to save the informant who was supposed to bring down Fisk and ends up being accused of the crime. He then becomes public enemy number 1. The Kingpin now controls the FBI agents monitoring him. Reunited with Vanessa, she tells him she no longer wants to stay in the background. She now wants to be fully part of his life, including his criminal activities. On her side, Karen confronts Fisk and confesses to him that she was the one who killed his right-hand man in season 1. Maddened with rage, Fisk sends Bullseye after her. Matt manages to save her, but once again is completely overpowered by Dex. Later, Matt reveals the truth to Bullseye. Fisk had the woman Dex loved killed to better manipulate him. Broken, Dex loses control and seeks revenge. He then shows up at Fisk and Vanessa's wedding and tries to kill her. Daredevil intervenes and a three-way fight breaks out. In an extremely violent fight, the Kingpin ends up breaking Bullseye's spine. Matt, for his part, goes after Fisk but manages to stop himself before killing him.
You are a killer. God knows I want you to love me, but you can't destroy what I have. I killed you.
The two men then make a deal. If Fisk agrees to go back to prison, Matt will leave Vanessa alone. Otherwise, he will have her imprisoned for life as well. Dex, on his side, undergoes spinal surgery, and we know he'll be back. This is where Daredevil's adventures on Netflix end. But his companions also got several seasons, and let's be honest, they're clearly less interesting than their first ones. So I suggest I quickly summarize all that for you, so we can move on to the other defenders. In season 2 of Jessica Jones, we explore the origins of her powers. We learn that after the car accident that killed her parents, Jessica underwent a series of experiments conducted by the company IGH. She discovers that she wasn't the only test subject and that her own mother is actually still alive. Her mother also gained powers, but her psychological state turned her into an unstable monster. At the same time, Trish, her best friend, becomes jealous of Jessica's strength. She then decides to take the same drug as Will Simpson, in the form of an inhaler. Obsessed with gaining powers, she kidnaps the doctor behind the experiments and Jessica, forcing him to give her the same treatment. Eventually, Jessica's mother, falling into madness, kidnaps her daughter and tries to flee to Canada. Trish finds them and coldly shoots them. Jessica's mother is the one who decides to take responsibility for her death to protect Trish, but she will never forgive her. In season 3, Jessica faces a serial killer named Gregory Salinger. Unlike her, he has no powers and deeply despises enhanced beings, but he makes up for it with methodical intelligence and extreme cruelty. His opposition to Jessica presents a new challenge for the detective, who can no longer simply solve the problem by force. At the same time, Trish becomes completely obsessed with proving that she is better than Jessica. She then adopts the vigilante identity of Hellcat, but gradually falls into extremism. By ruthlessly killing the criminals she hunts, Jessica faces a moral dilemma. Should she let her soul sister rid the world of criminals, or stay true to her principles and stop her? When Trish tries to kill Salinger, Jessica stops her and turns them both over to the authorities. Both are then imprisoned in the raft. Jessica ends the season more alone than ever, but still decides to start a new life by staying in New York. As for Luke Cage, he returns to Arlen in season 2 as a free and innocent man. And thanks to Foggy Nelson, he has now become a real celebrity in the neighborhood and offers his services as a hero. Misty Knight, who lost an arm during the events of The Defenders, now has her famous bionic arm from the comics, given to her by Run Under Price. The main threat of this season is called Bushmaster. A brutal leader of a Jamaican gang, he uses plant-based magic to compete with Luke Cage, even going so far as to publicly humiliate him. Luke grows more aggressive, eventually pushing Claire Temple away, leaving her afraid of who he is becoming. Meanwhile, Maria Dillard permanently gives up politics to devote herself fully to crime. She has all her rivals eliminated during the massacre at the RIMM restaurant. But she ends up being betrayed, arrested, and locked up in prison before being poisoned by her own daughter, the very same one who supplied the magic powder used by Bushmaster. It is at this moment that Danny Rand steps in, forming with Luke Cage the famous duo Heroes for Hire in order to destroy Bushmaster's laboratory. Against all odds, Maria bequeaths the Harlem Paradise Club to Luke Cage. In her will, Luke accepts this inheritance and thus becomes the new godfather of Harlem's underworld, positioning himself as a sort of sheriff in charge of regulating the gangs, a decision that distances him for good from Misty Knight and Claire Temple. For his part, Danny Rand refocuses on Chinatown in season 2 of Iron Fist. Following the disappearance of Kunlun and the fall of the Hand, Danny gives up his position in the family business. He now lives with Colleen Wing and patrols at night to fight the Triads. Davos, Danny's former best friend in Kunlun, thinks Danny is dishonoring the Iron Fist's power. He does everything possible to reclaim the power he believes was stolen from him, aided by former Sokovian prisoner of war Mary Walker, also known as Typhoid Mary. He manages to trap Danny and perform a ritual that allows him to transfer the power of the dragon into his own body. However, Davos's red mark quickly shows that he is corrupted and unable to control this power. He then begins a bloody crusade, executing both Triad leaders and criminals indiscriminately in the streets of New York. Injured, Danny then asks Colin Wing to become the next Iron Fist. She discovers that she is the direct descendant of the very first woman, Iron Fist, the pirate queen of Pingai Bay. In a duel against Davos, Colin finally manages to reclaim the dragon's powers. Her fist then glows with a white light. Davos is arrested, the Triads are disarmed, and Colin Wing becomes the new protector of Chinatown. As for Danny, he sets out to travel the world in search of the history of the Iron Fist. The series ends with a rather improbable scene, where he shows his ability to channel his chi into revolver bullets. Yeah, we didn't discuss the Punisher series here, since he likely won't be in Born Again Season 2, I doubt it'll affect his special much anyway. And even if they're cool, they don't show anything that's really decisive for what's next. It's really in Season 2 of Daredevil that he shows how good he is. Guys, it's finally time for us to dive into the return of Daredevil. In the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the Devil is in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We just relived the events of the Defenders universe, which take place between 2015 and 2018. We know today that these events are totally canon in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, so they lead directly to the events of Infinity War, which means that these heroes also suffered the consequences of the snap. In the Echo series, we learn that during the 5 years between Infinity War and Endgame, Wilson Fisk was released from prison due to procedural errors. So the Kingpin didn't keep his promise and returned to business. We see Fisk for the first time in the Marvel Cinematic Universe in the Hawkeye series in 2021. Hawaiian shirt, very cartoonish tone. We all had a hard time understanding this first appearance, but Andrew Guest, showrunner of Wonder Man, explained what happened. Marvel reportedly contacted him at the time to write the entire series, 1 week before filming.
I'm gonna send you 6 episodes. I want to meet tomorrow to talk about it. Filming in New York starts in a week and a half and they want to rewrite everything. I agreed.
With the instruction to include Wilson Fisk, so he appears quickly, before being shot by Maya Lopez in a scene inspired by the Daredevil arc, Part of a Whole. As for the Hawaiian shirt, it was Vincent D'Onofrio himself who insisted on wearing it. It was a reference to a cover of the comic Amazing Spider-Man Family Business, which he had been using as his wallpaper for years. In short, in Echo, we see that Fisk is recovering from his operation and disappears from the business for several months. During this time, Vanessa takes back control of the business and imposes her own vision. Fisk, meanwhile, remains obsessed with Maya and eventually finds her. He is then confronted by Echo's new power, which plunges him back into the trauma of his childhood. Marked by this experience, Fisk returns to New York with a new goal, to become mayor of the city, and to put an end to the vigilantes who ruined his life. For his part, Matt Murdock reappears for the first time in the Marvel Cinematic Universe in Spider-Man: No Way Home, where he defends Peter Parker, facing the DO, District of Columbia. But what's more interesting here is to look chronologically at Matt's journey since the end of his series. We know that he and Fisk survived. After the snap, it's much harder to know what happened to the other characters. But if Fisk returned to the criminal world, we can assume that Vanessa also survived. Making the deal with Matt Void in the Echo series, Matt is still active as Daredevil. He investigates the gang still present in New York and confronts Maya, who is working for the Kingpin at that time. 1 year after the events of Endgame, in the fall of 2024, Murdock defends Peter Parker. The She-Hulk series takes place during the summer of 2025. This time, it's not just Matt who returns, but Daredevil himself. He's passing through Los Angeles for a trial, but also to make himself a new yellow and red costume, as a tribute to his beginnings in the comics. At that moment, he seems happier and more fulfilled than ever, even developing a relationship with Jennifer Walters, but this lightheartedness is short-lived. A few weeks later, the tragic events of Born Again begin. At the end of 2025, Matt meets up with his friends and former partners for a drink near their old office. Foggy is working on a case where an informant is ready to testify against Vanessa Fisk, but Benjamin Poindexter, also known as Bullseye, is back as well. He kills Foggy and attacks the bar where Matt was. Matt then puts on the Daredevil suit and faces Bullseye with all his strength, but Foggy's heart stops and Matt breaks down. Breaking the only rule he had always imposed on himself. In a fit of rage, he throws Dex off the broken rooftop, convinced that Foggy's death is his fault and that Dex came for revenge. Matt decides to give up the suit. It is at this moment that Cherry, a former police officer turned private detective, discovers that Matt is Daredevil. He keeps his secret and becomes his new ally in the shadows. But Bullseye survives, and this is where Daredevil Born Again truly begins. Daredevil Born Again. So we really start the series a year later, in the winter of 2026, with Bullseye's trial. Following Matt's testimony, he is sentenced to life in prison. Matt and Karen meet for the first time since Foggy's death, and things are clearly tense between them. Matt, now fully focused on being a lawyer, has started a new firm with the former prosecutor, Kristen McDuffie. He is now in a relationship with one of her friends, the psychiatrist Heather Glenn. But without Daredevil, the city is now plagued by crime, with Vanessa as the new crime boss. In Fisk's absence, she runs all the gangs in the city. With an iron fist, though only in a velvet glove, he is finally back, but this time with a new plan. Crime is over. Now Fisk is running for mayor of New York, and despite his status as a former criminal, he is the one who wins the election. This pushes Matt to confront him. Fisk, for his part, insists that he is now a new man.
But you should know I was also raised to believe in retribution. So if you step out of line, I will be there.
A new deal is made. Daredevil won't return if Fisk behaves, but without Daredevil, other vigilantes have appeared, starting with White Tiger, also known as Hector Ayala. One night, without his costume, he defends a man from an attack, but one of the attackers is hit by the subway and dies. Unfortunately, it turns out he was an undercover corrupt cop. Oh shit, oh that's stupid. So the official version is that Hector was the attacker. Matt decides to defend him and discovers his secret. While investigating, he catches two police officers trying to eliminate a key witness and is forced to unleash his violent side. To win Hector's case, he decides to reveal his double identity to the jury, which allows the man to go free. But that same evening, White Tiger is assassinated in the middle of the street by a man wearing the Punisher's symbol. Matt then goes to confront his old friend in an incredible scene.
So what now? Every day Bullseye goes to the chow hall, eats his slop. You know, he gets to breathe the same air that you breathe. You feel good about that. He got life. How about old Foggy? He got life?
Frank explains that corrupt cops are using his logo for vigilante justice. Meanwhile, Hector's niece Angela retrieves his belongings, including the power-giving amulet. She will later become the next White Tiger. On his side, Wilson Fisk, freshly elected, struggles against his nature, just to be a good mayor, which turns out to be more complicated than he had imagined. In his plan for the city, he tries to rehabilitate the Red Hook port, which has long been abandoned to criminal activities. To do this, he tries to find funding. He quickly realizes that those old kingpin ways help him speed up the process a bit. That's how he sets up Jacques Duquesne, also known as Swordsman, whom we saw in the Hawkeye series. That's not the only Marvel Cinematic Universe connection, since Matt, in a filler episode, ends up working with Kamala Khan's father in a bank heist story. At the same time, the influence of the media, which is very important in Daredevil's series, is modernizing. Now, BB Report plays a major role in covering the mayor's activities. It's a podcast hosted by Bibi Yurik. As I told you, she is the niece of the reporter who was murdered a few years earlier by the Kingpin, and she uses Fisk's new right-hand man, Daniel Blake, to get information. Daniel, who later will swear loyalty to the mayor no matter what he asks. It's a move that Fisk approves of, making him his protege instead of crushing his skull. Because Fisk is slowly falling back into his old demons, in therapy, trying to save his marriage. With Dr. Glenn, who, let me remind you, is Matt's girlfriend, Fisk tries to get over the affair Vanessa had with another man during his long absence. She makes him promise not to kill him, which Fisk does. Well, he locks him in a cage, but he doesn't kill him because Vanessa herself takes care of it, bringing the two lovers back together. Throughout the beginning of the series, we see graffiti against Fisk appearing in the city. We learn that it's the work of a serial killer who uses the blood of his victims to create his art. He calls himself Muse. Fisk then uses this opportunity to create his new elite unit, the Anti-Vigilante Task Force, made up of all the worst corrupt cops in the city, a unit that has carte blanche. While Angela goes to investigate this killer, she gets captured. Matt is therefore forced to put on his Daredevil costume to save her.
Daredevil?
I'm here.
And as if that wasn't enough, Matt's girlfriend not only has Fisk as a client, but also Muse. After escaping Daredevil, he tries to kill her to create his ultimate masterpiece. Daredevil saves her, but it's Heather who kills him instead. Fisk uses this moment to validate his task force, and Heather becomes pro-Fisk and anti-vigilante. Pushing Matt away towards Bullseye's side, Dex is transferred to a cutthroat unit to be eliminated. So he decides to call on Matt to get him out of there and confesses that Foggy's murder was ordered. Matt leaves him in his mess.
I can do it for you.
He started fighting the guy, but Dex manages to escape and tries to assassinate Fisk. That's when Matt hears that it was Vanessa who orchestrated everything, as she confesses it to Fisk, so he saves his sworn friend and takes a bullet for him. Fisk uses this assassination attempt to impose a curfew and total control over the city. All vigilantes must be taken down. That's how he sends his task force to assassinate Matt at his home, despite the fact that Matt saved his life. But fortunately, Karen Page, back in New York, sends Frank to protect his friend. Together, they manage to escape and discover that Vanessa had Foggy assassinated to cover up her activities. On the Red Hook Pier, thanks to an old legal decree, he realizes that Red Hook is actually a free port of the United States, not subject to any territorial law, making any illegal activity on the port unprosecutable. However, after being shot with a bulletproof vest, Matt is too weak to do anything, unlike Frank, who decides to go kick some ass. He gets captured but not killed because all these cops idolize him. He offers them to join him to do what he does best. Killing bad guys, but in a legal way. Only for Castle, the bad guys to take down are them.
What do you know about me? How I see the world?
You know how I see the world? Bunch of clowns, I ain't gonna serve with you. I won't fucking piss on you if you're on fire, you goddamn.
He is then locked in a cage among all of Fisk's opponents. Well, even though he doesn't stay there long because he manages to escape immediately, Matt, for his part, tries to gather an army to defeat Fisk once and for all. And this is where Season 1 of Daredevil Born Again ends. But then, what can we expect from the future of this new universe? Street level, the future of street level. I'm warning you right now, this is where we really enter the spoiler zone, because I'm going to focus a lot on the comics, which will inevitably be the sources of inspiration for what's next. So, hang on or run away. Even though the series is called Daredevil Born Again, linked to Bendis' run, Seasons 1 and 2 are much more inspired by other, more recent runs of the Devil of Hell's Kitchen. Starting with Mayor Fisk, which covers the completely legal election of Kahid as mayor and the hunt for city vigilantes. But also Devil's Reign, where Fisk totally loses it and even hires the Thunderbolts to hunt down vigilantes in a much more forceful way. Until the end of his term, it's clearly this direction that Born Again will continue. The showrunner, Dario Scardapan, tells us that Season 2 picks up 6 months after the end of the first. We find the confrontation between Fisk and Murdoch in a more intimate hunt than ever. Both will put their costumes back on, but this time to face the man behind the mask. Dario explains that his main inspiration is the French resistance. Basically, oppressed commanders resist thanks to courage and sabotage against an oppressor with overwhelming resources. Daredevil then becomes a wanted fugitive, and Matt disappears from the lives of those close to him. That's also why he wears a costume inspired by the Shadowlands run, a black suit adorned with the red double D. It's simply his old costume repainted black to represent the aspect of resistance in the darkness, as opposed to the red Daredevil, which inspires fear in criminals. And it seems that this black paint deteriorates as the season goes on, gradually revealing the devil underneath. Karen, for her part, is indeed back this season and decides to join the fight. After being an investigator, she becomes a fighter alongside Matt, and we see in the trailers that she is not alone. Angela becomes the new White Tiger, Swordman, but most importantly, Jessica Jones also joins the fight. Two visions clash, justice versus control. And Fisk is going to sink deeper and deeper. The trailer even shows us a boxing match. Posters announcing this fight as a charity event have leaked online. Actor Vincent D'Onofrio calls this a key turning point of the season. Because we see Fisk unable to contain his fury, it's probably the beginning of his downward spiral. Fisk becomes the archetype of power losing its grip, making irrational and unpopular decisions to keep control, all the while isolating himself more and more. We also see, in a shot inspired by Devil's Reign, that the people of New York will gradually support Daredevil as Fisk spirals out of control, standing by his side wearing Daredevil masks made with whatever they had. A scene that reminds us of the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie, where New York stands as one with Spidey, but this won't be the only battle for Kingpin. Two new characters created for the series will appear. Mr. Charles, played by Matthew Lillard, a former agent of the series. He's not at all impressed by Fisk and will play power games with him. And Governor Marge McCaffrey, played by Lily Taylor, who becomes a tough political opponent. So, Fisk will have to fight on all fronts to keep his power, and violence won't be able to solve everything. Foggy Nelson will indeed be back, but everything suggests that it will only be in flashbacks. Despite everything, his death remains a key motivation that drives Matt and Karen to act. In fact, we understand that Matt won't just team up with allies, but also with his enemies, starting with Bullseye. So does that mean he's going to fall to the dark side? Possible? Either way, he seems willing to do anything to stop Fisk. Meanwhile, there's no news about Punisher, who's apparently busy elsewhere. We'll see him again in his own special, which we'll discuss next. Jessica Jones's return is also notable. The showrunner, who worked on her series, explains that he already wanted to bring her back as early as Season 1.
He pitched it in Season 1 and we weren't able to pull it off in the first season. And I'm very grateful now because it's so much more. It fits in with the story so much better in this season.
But his return in season 2 would actually make more sense. And above all, he hinted that everything would make even more sense at the end of the season.
Don't want to spoil anything, and I won't. What's amazing is that entrance takes us to a place that now kicks us forward, which is great.
And that's where we clearly get into theory, because I think the end of the series will lead us to the return of the other defenders. So, we already know this, since the showrunners have spoiled it, this season marks the end of Fisk's political arc. So he's going to lose the mayor's office, but we also know that he'll return to the Marvel Cinematic Universe in a completely different way. And that's where I think the series will take inspiration from Devil's Reign, but not only that. Mike Colter, who plays Luke Cage, has hinted at his return for a month.
I do think now it's time. I think Daredevil's back. I've had discussions with Marvel, and I do think that it's very, very likely that I will come back at some point, but I don't know when, but I think I will.
He explained several times that he would only come back if the character evolved significantly in the comics. Luke and Jessica are a couple and even parents, and Luke is forced to run against Fisk to beat him politically. And yes, at the end of the run, he's the one who becomes the new mayor of New York, strength to Fisk into exile. And that's why I don't think Fisk is going to lose by force. The introduction of new political characters shows that we're not in a simple good versus evil confrontation that uses force, but that he will probably be discredited instead. And that fits perfectly with the street-level direction Marvel seems to be taking, because in the comics, the events of Devil's Reign lead directly to gang wars. Fisk's absence plunges New York into a succession war. After an assassination attempt on Tombstone, the gangs set New York ablaze. And Mayor Cage gives Spider-Man 48 hours to fix the situation. Spidey then puts together a team of New York vigilantes to bring peace to the city. And even if it's not exactly the plot of Spider-Man Brand New Day, we understand that Tombstone is firmly established as the new boss for Spidey's next trilogy. And that New York is now going to plunge into massive criminal chaos. As for the Punisher, even without a date, we can guess his special will link Born Again and Spider-Man, with him joining Peter, so Frank will likely be fully involved in the gang war. We also know that during the events of Thunderbolt, which takes place after season 2 of Born Again, there is no mention of Fisk or his task force, so we can understand that they have completely disappeared. But then, what happens to Daredevil? This is where everything changes. The street level overall is indeed moving towards modern comics. Yes, but the showrunner clearly stated that starting from season 3, he would return to the darker run by Bendis and Brubaker. And that's where it gets really interesting, because Bendis is the author of the legendary Born Again run, the one where Matt begins a true descent into hell. Fisk discovers his identity, keeps the information, but decides to destroy him. Later, his identity ends up leaking anyway. The media picks it up, and Matt ends up in prison. That's where Brubaker's run begins, The Devil in Cell Block D, where Matt tries to survive in a prison full of criminals who want him dead. That's also where Foggy gets murdered in prison while he was visiting him. This event makes Matt completely lose control, sending him into a destructive rage. He teams up with Fisk in prison, and Frank gets himself incarcerated to help Matt escape. This leads to an investigation across Europe to find the person behind Foggy's murder, who turns out to be Vanessa. Yes, everything comes together, except she reveals to him that Foggy is actually not dead, but being held in a secret hideout. Well. Meanwhile, Danny Rand puts on the Daredevil costume in New York to protect Hell's Kitchen and try to clear Matt's name. With an active Daredevil and Matt in prison, doubt sets in and the charges are eventually dropped. Matt is cleared. And I think that's exactly where we're headed. Yes, I think Luke Cage will have a political role. Yes, I think the end of season 2 will lead to a victory for Matt, but also to his identity being revealed and his conviction. And yes, I think Danny Rand will come back without his powers, trying to clear his name in the Daredevil costume. And if I'm right, season 3 could finally take us somewhere other than just a simple duel. Fisk versus Daredevil. Even though the part where Fisk and Frank are in prison has already been more or less adapted. In season 2 on Netflix, the general idea is there, especially since the rest is already mapped out in the comics. All of this leads to Shadowland, where the Hand takes back the Kingpin's territories, an organization that seems to appear in the Spider-Man movie and in the comics. Daredevil agrees to become their leader in order to destroy them from within and prevent Fisk from taking control of this dark army. That's complicated, so we'll discuss it later. I've definitely made this video too long. If you're interested in these comics, I made a complete Daredevil reading guide for this series. Find the link on my website in the description. Anyway, I sincerely hope this video will help you fully enjoy this new season of Daredevil, Born Again, which, if my little finger is right, is absolutely excellent. And if you're discovering me for the first time, I analyze and theorize every week about the Marvel and Detective Comics superhero universes. So if you enjoyed this, subscribe, it's free. We'll see each other every Sunday at 4 PM for a new video. In the meantime, don't forget to stay curious, that's the secret to being happy. Ciao.